Hi everyone, Daljit Peterson here from astrolab21.com. And in this video we're going to be talking about Leo season 2021. And weren't we just talking about Cancer season 2021? It seems like Cancer season just went by in a blur. I don't know if any of you out there felt that, but man, it seemed like this past month just flew by. And I think there's a lot of reasons astrologically why that would have been so. We've had Mercury's been really moving quickly as it moved out of its retrograde period in Gemini during Gemini season, went direct and has been moving through Cancer really quickly. It's about to catch up with the Sun in Leo. It's about to have its superior conjunction, which we'll talk about in the chart, and it's reaching that point of its maximum speed in its orbit. So there's a sense of quickening. I think our ideas, our communication, right, our minds are really moving much quicker than normal at this time of year. So I think that contributed to it. You know, we also had the conjunction of Venus and Mars in Leo last month, right? What we talked about is the Summer of Love 2.0. So a lot of stimulation to our creativity, to our sense of being connected to others, our relational energy really getting stimulated quite a bit during this Cancer season that we're just coming out of. So now we're going to pivot to Leo season. We'll take a look at the charts. We'll go through the month sort of day by day and see what the major configurations are that are coming our way for the coming month. But before I jump into that, I want to first, let's just talk about what it means to shift from Cancer season to Leo season, right? We always like to frame these videos in this seasonal context as we examine the sun as it moves through each sign of the zodiac in its yearly, in the solar year. So we've just finished Cancer season, what started for us at the Summer Solstice at the beginning of Cancer season, inaugurating summer season with that cardinal water sign, which is Cancer. So for the last month, we were called to really sort of ground ourselves in our emotional bodies, to really establish our tradition. We talked about family. We talked about the 4th of July coming during Cancer season, right? We really want to get rooted and get a solid sense of ourselves during Cancer season. Well, now that energy is starting to shift. So we move from cardinal water into fixed fire, which is Leo, right? So now we're going to take that emotional energy and move it up and out, right? Get this levitational fire-like energy as we stimulate our creativity, our passion, our enthusiasm, our intuition, right? More of the spiritual nature, which is what fire tends to represent. So we're gonna feel that shift as the sun moves through Leo. We're gonna be stimulated and called to really tap into our creativity, our self-expression, right? Our sense of authority, right? Putting ourselves out there and up there. You know, Leo's all about the pyramid of power, right? It seeks to get to the top. You think about the symbol of Leo being the lion, right? It's the apex predator, right? The king of the jungle. So Leo's all about rulership, leadership, authority. It's about creativity. It's about the dramatic presentation of life. You know, it rules actors and musicians and performers. It has this performative, playful quality to it. So during this time, in the peak of summer, we're all sort of called every year at this season to really embrace our sense of fun, our sense of play. And so hopefully we can find ways to integrate that into our lives. A sense of humor, too, and a sense of joy, I think, which has been in woefully short supply, I would say, in the last 18 months or so. There seems to be a quarantine on humor, which I'm hoping changes, and maybe this Leo season will give us some stimulation. So that's sort of the background of what we can, you know, how we're talking about this seasonally. But of course, every season is unique because all of the planets, particularly outer planets, are in different relationships to the Sun and Mercury and the inner planets as they move through these signs seasonally. And this creates much different energy patterns year to year, which makes everything, you know, unique year to year. So we have the consistency of the sun moving through each of the signs, that seasonal sense that grounds us in the year, that grounds us in the seasons. But each one is unique because all of the other planets are influencing that energy pattern in unique ways and calling us, stimulating us to work that energy personally, collectively, in different ways in order to move the energy and to evolve as individuals and as communities, as a species, really, which is the gift of astrology. So we'll jump up, we'll throw the chart up here for right now, and coincidentally, as we speak, the sun is just ingressed into Leo. 0 degrees. When I started the video, it was still in the very last seconds of Cancer, but now here we are, 7:30 in the morning here in California time, and we have inaugurated Leo season. So just taking a look at the chart, what's going on as we start this Leo season, right? We still have the sun has been in this opposition with Pluto in Cancer over the last week or so, right? As it finished up in the last degrees of Cancer, it formed this pretty intense opposition, as it does every year, right? And has been doing every year since 2008, when Pluto first moved into Capricorn, right? If we remember the summer of 2008, which was the beginning of the unraveling of the financial crisis that resulted in the Great Recession, that we're still in many ways living in the shadow of that event. So this entire period of Pluto in Capricorn, which, as I said, went in 2008, and it's going to be in Capricorn through 2024. So we still got that last 5 degrees to go. And this has been a pretty transformational period for all things Capricorn. If you think about Capricorn as ruling the structure of society and all the major systems, right? The economic system, the political system, the technical system, the communication system, the educational system. All of these major systems have been stress tested by Pluto's transit through the sign of Capricorn, as it does in this part of its cycle. Every 250 or so years. So we are in the midst of a transformational crisis of our structures, of our society itself. Capricorn, Pluto is coming through and trying to reform. All the things that are no longer of service to society and the community are coming under intense scrutiny. But it also has this interesting, almost shadow quality to it, because Pluto in Capricorn also represents power and the retention of power. This is actually the ultimate symbol of what we would call plutocracy, right? Which is the rule of the many by the few, right? And what has this period really shown us in terms of from 2008 onward? We've had the highest concentration of wealth in the history of civilization, perhaps, certainly in the modern era, right? Where we have the wealthiest 1% owning more of the world's resources than the rest of the 99% combined. Just this incredible disparity in wealth distribution. Well, that's Pluto in Capricorn, right? That's the power, this incredible concentration and power within the social structure. But of course, it's simultaneously being challenged, right? So there's this sort of cathartic, transformational, and often destructive element wherever Pluto goes through. It's really trying to transform and reshape the characteristics of the sign that it transits. So in this case, Capricorn. And we've talked a lot about it. Pluto-Saturn conjunction exactly coincided with the outbreak of coronavirus last year. It was a big deal. We had a massive, Capricorn configuration throughout 2020. Of course, Saturn has now moved on to Aquarius, and we're going to talk about that in a bit too. But just as we start this Leo season, and we have the sun just finishing that opposition, and what we think about with oppositions is like, okay, we're trying to find this balance between Pluto, Capricorn, society, the bigger picture, structure, versus the sun in Leo, which is our own personal creativity, our own sense of our own sovereignty, our self-expression, creative self-expression, the joy and celebration of the individual. And so there's a sense, I think, that we're in this time period, and as I said, every year we're getting this opposition. It's happening at the end of Cancer season, right, as we approach and oppose Pluto in Capricorn. So really getting this sense of like this restlessness, I think, that a lot of us are probably feeling, particularly fire signs, right? So if you are a Leo sun, or a Leo rising. And then also I think Aries and Sag risings are going to be really stimulated by this this configuration, because it really stirs up our creative passions. Those people who have fire or a lot of fire in their charts tend to be stimulated and tend to have a lot of that sense of wanting to express themselves very creatively. So Sun in Leo definitely constellates that for us. And this opposition to Pluto and Capricorn, and the sense of the heavy power structures. Like, I'm expecting, it's a real nice configuration for some creative resistance, right? I think I was kind of musing earlier about, I was thinking about the song Street Fighting Man, right, by the Rolling Stones. And it just has this configuration to it of this creative resistance. And I think of what happened in the summer of '68 when that came out. Came out at the same time, in the same week almost, as the national convention in Chicago for the presidential election that year. And there was armed conflict. Of course, Sorkin's recent movie on the Chicago 7 was all about that, right? And coincidentally, that song was released, and no Chicago radio station would actually play the song when it was released, which was kind of interesting, because it was kind of calling for a sort of revolutionary ethos that was stirring in the population. So there's a similar tone, I think, coming here now, but I think something about being much more creatively expressive, right? And playful in our sense of expressing the individual. What are we trying to bring to the world? What is our own unique creative contribution to be made to society? I feel like there's this sense in this shifting that we're all experiencing, what's going on in the collective as a result of this astrological weather. Well, here's a chance for us to really get stimulated and to be as creatively expressive as possible. And I'm hoping we can do it playfully. We can do it with a sense of wit and humor, right? And a wink and an eye. This idea of serious play, I think, is what we've got configured here as we start the season, and then as we'll see later on in the month, as that Sun and Mercury joins it, and we're going to get an opposition with Saturn and Aquarius, right? So, and we're going to get another mystical rectangle. We had that one last month. Now we get another one, which is another really great opportunity. Super powerful configuration for us to really leverage some of these energy patterns and to really make some real positive, proactive, creative, joyful change in the world for ourselves, for our relationships, for our communities, for our culture. So hopefully this will be a very stimulating month for us, this Leo season 2021. Of course, we talked last month about the conjunction of Mars and Venus in the sign of Leo, Summer of Love 2.0. And again, I feel like, I don't know about you personally, I'd love to hear in the comments, how was your relationships over the course of last month? I found a real deepening in my relationship. A lot came up, but we had that energy and effort to work through some things. And we've come through the month really much more intimately connected, much closer. It's been really a joyful process. But now we see simultaneously here with the Sun moving into Leo, we're getting Venus moving into Virgo. So a little shift there too in our sense of our values, our aesthetic sensibilities, our attractionness, right? All that Venusian quality, the sensual nature, which has been in this really fiery, demonstrative Leo modality for the last few weeks. Now there's a little shift, okay? Coming in, what do we get with Venus in Virgo? A little bit more of a focus on a more practical, earth-centered, grounded sense of our sensibilities, of our sensuality, right? A little bit more of a focus on the day-to-day, the practical daily routines of life. I like to think of, when I see Venus moving through the sign of Virgo, it's like, oh, here's the time for us to beautify the everyday, to make our routines as aesthetically pleasing as possible, to bring a sense of beauty and value into our work life, into our vocation. How can we make our daily work life a little more beautiful, a little more joyful, a little more sensual? I also think about Virgo as being, that practical side of life, the details, the nitty-gritty, right? So there's a sense of beautifying and perfecting our routines and the nitty-gritty of life, right? It's a really nice time for that, as we're going to have Venus going through the sign of Virgo for the next 3 or 4 weeks or so. What else do we see pop out in the chart here? We've got, we've talked about, and we'll talk about this more, one of these year-long configurations is this Saturn in relationship to the nodal axis, right? It's in this harmonious relationship where it's in sextile to the south node in Sag, and it's been trining the north node in Gemini all year, this nice air trine. And this is, something that is the part of this mystic rectangle configuration that we've been talking about. So as we move forward, we'll see that getting stimulated and fall into shape once the Sun and Mercury move over here into further into the degrees of Leo. Of course, we've been talking about Jupiter that's been retrograding and backing up. It dipped its toes into the early degrees of Pisces this spring, and now it's begun its retrograde period and is about to ingress back into the sign of Aquarius, where it will stay retrograde and then station direct later in the year. And it won't be until the end of 2021, late December, before we find Jupiter back in this degree where it is right now. Gets back to 0 degrees Pisces, and then 2022 it's going to make its transit mostly through that sign. So it'll be a much different year Jupiter-wise for us. But and as I'm talking about, you notice that we have all of the outer planets, with the exception of Uranus over here in Taurus, but most of them are in this one sector of the sky in the last quadrant, mostly of the zodiac, and they all have begun their retrograde period. So we're in this like 4 to 6 month period where all of the outer planets are retrograding, moving backwards. So there's this sense of review, rewind, revisit, reformat, replace, right? Redo. Within much of these bigger picture, within society itself. We had so much very fast moving, right? Things were moving really fast in the culture from, the end of the year through the first 6 months of 2021. We think about the vaccine rollouts and all that entailed, right? Everything was just like, let's get as many shots and as many arms as possible, and a lot of ambitious changes. We had a administration change here in the United States. There's been a huge shift in the tone. And now I think we're going to start to have this review of that. Like, okay, there's this sense of things kind of coming back to center. I did equate with, certainly Jupiter going back into Aquarius, what we're seeing with, I think, this Delta variant that's rearing its head around the globe, that we're not out of the woods yet. Again, I think it's this whole issue of the Aquarius archetype, especially with both Jupiter and Saturn moving through that sign. It's a big shift, right? We had that great conjunction last December, right, when we initiated this Aquarian age. And we're seeing I think we're going to see the best and worst of Aquarius, especially in the beginning of this phase, as we start to really grapple with what that archetype really symbolizes, right? And it's a difficult one. I think I have a graph of, Saturn and Aquarius. If we just kind of take a look at, let me get my head out of the way there so you can see it all, right? Like, what are the qualities of Aquarius? It has that scientific, progressive, revolutionary energy to it, which, a lot of what we're experiencing in the culture, like technologically, the medical innovations coming around, the vaccines themselves are very much an Aquarian thing. These are very new medical technologies that we've never really used before. They get compared a lot to vaccines of the past, but in fact, these are different beasts altogether. So very Aquarian, it's very future-oriented, it's very scientific, objective. It's been drilled into our heads, trust the science, and, but it also has a shadow side, as every one of these archetypes does. So there's this, almost extremist It can be paradoxical at times, right? You can see this opinionated. It can be very narrow-minded, the Aquarius archetype. And I think we're getting some of that. We're seeing that showing up within the scientific community. And of course, having Saturn there, like all of these restrictions and structure and law and order and authority, right? We're getting this real struggle between who is in authority, who has the right to determine how to live our lives, right? And some of that is getting conflicting with, Saturn in Aquarius is a difficult archetype to really negotiate, because it wants to be limiting and boundary setting, that Saturn, right? And Aquarius is trying to push and rebel and revolutionize and be very progressive. So a very interesting conflict that we're dealing with in terms of that archetype, for sure. So that's on the table. And so with Jupiter backing up into Aquarius, some of those, I think that big expansive push is going to be under review. We're going to really have to figure out, are we using the right methods? Are we doing the right thing? Are the vaccines right? Is the quarantining right? We're getting, new shelter or new restrictions coming up in response to the variant. I think our media ecology has become so polluted. It's very difficult to navigate right now. And I think some of that astrological weather is sort of supporting that kind of environment. So just good to wrap your brain around what's going on. A lot of onus on us as individuals to really do more heavy lifting in terms of making sense of the world in this current times that we're living through. It's not enough to just allow people to just tell us what to think, right? We need to start to really think for ourselves, right? Sun and Leo, individual consciousness, as opposed to just being told by the authorities, whether it's the plutocracy, right? Whether it's Pluto in Capricorn, whether it's Saturn in Aquarius, right? Saying this is the way you must do it. I think a lot of this energy is coming under review, and some of this oppositional energy, I think, is going to really force us all to make our own individual sovereign decisions for ourselves. Enough said on that. I'll get off my soapbox. So let's just start to cruise through the month day by day and just see what kind of shows up for us. Immediately we see the next day we're going to get the moon in conjunction with that Pluto energy, so an emotional tie to this Plutonian revolutionary, evolutionary desire to change the structure of our lives, coming into an opposition with Mercury in Cancer, so communicating and expressing ourselves, expressing the emotional nature. That could just be, it's going to be a short-lived effect that day, but we'll see that on the 23rd. So there's Mercury opposition to Pluto. So we had the Sun starting the month, with that opposition. Now Mercury, and as I said, Mercury's starting to move faster and faster, right? We had that retrograde period in Gemini where we had what would be the inferior conjunction. And I'm going to show you what that means in a minute. Since it's gone direct after the retrograde, it's really starting to pick up speed, and it really reaches its maximum speed as it comes into conjunction again with the Sun, which is what's called the superior conjunction. What do I mean by that? So if we look at what's going on, in the solar system, basically Mercury makes two conjunctions with the Sun every year. It makes its inferior conjunction when Mercury is traveling between the Sun and the Earth, and that's where it's in its retrograde period. So we had that in Gemini in May when Mercury was through here. Since then, Mercury has moved direct, and it's now getting to that point where it will have its superior conjunction, which means it will be in the opposite sign. It'll be exactly opposite of the Earth and the Sun over here in Leo, which is coming up in a few days. So right now, Mercury's moving really fast. And so the superior conjunction is a different energy, right? It's where it's shifting, and it's going to become the morning star. It'll start to rise before the Sun every morning. There's a really great article that I often refer to. Where do I have that? Called The Four Faces of Mercury. This is written, this has been up for, this is an old web page, and I've actually copied and pasted this because I was afraid it was going to disappear one day. But it's on Kalida.com. It's about the four faces of Mercury. And he talks about this, and what we get right now in the superior conjunction is what he calls the Promethean direct phase, right? When it becomes the morning star. So there's this energetic Promethean quality to Mercury during this time of its cycle as it does this dance with the Earth and the Sun. And so we're coming into that Promethean phase. And as I said, Mercury's moving really quick, right? And it'll move past the Sun and become that rising star, the morning star, throughout much of Leo season and then into Virgo season as the summer ends. So a lot of energetic movement. So I feel like Mercury's gaining power. And so it's really this contact with Pluto is really going to reinforce that sense of that power struggle, that dynamic between the self and security and the needs of the society. And we're going to really be more expressive in our own emotional needs. Some of the deeper unconscious needs that we all have are going to get triggered by this configuration in the beginning of this first week of Leo season. What else? So move a few days. We see on July 26th, what's happening here. All of a sudden, this is what's interesting, right? You look at it just pops out at us, these aspects. And so we've got this Grand Cross going on here. So we're getting a stimulation with the moon joining Jupiter over here in those early degrees of Pisces, coming to square the nodes, right? We've been talking a lot about the nodes, along with this, the Saturn connection to it. This nodal axis is getting a lot of triggering over the course of 2021, and we really have until the end of the year to really figure out this entire 18-month period of the nodal axis as they've been transiting through the Gemini-Sag axis. So what we see here is we're getting this opposition to Mars in the late degrees of Leo. I think we also can pull in this Venus here. So that opposition. So what's going on there? So we've got the personal planets of Mars and Venus in opposition to this retreating Jupiter, right? We've gotten that window of opportunity to see what is it going to be like for the next year when Jupiter moves into the sign of Pisces. It's going to be a really creative, incredibly spiritually minded, a big opening up, I think, is coming our way in 2022. But now with the retrograde energy and about to move back into Aquarius, we're starting to get this inversion of that energy. We have to there's something we've missed during this year so far, that first 6 months of 2021 when Jupiter was moving really fast through Aquarius. We moved too fast. We missed something, and there's this opportunity to review it. And I feel like this configuration, this is going to be a really powerful day on July 26th when you've got the moon conjoining Jupiter and in opposition to Mars and Venus, and both squaring that nodal axis. And we've talked a lot about the nodal axis, right? We've got the south node in Sag, the past, versus the north node in Gemini, the future. And so we're really trying to reclaim, right? We always talk about the past, and the south node is really showing us our gifts. What are the things that we've acquired, that we've developed over a lifetime, over lifetimes, as individuals, as a community, as a collective, right? What is that Sagittarian gift? What is the wisdom? What is the great, the philosophical, the spiritual, the cosmological understanding? We're being called to really reclaim from our past, from our deep past, all that is of value, and to pull it forward into the future, into Gemini here with the North Node, and invigorate it with stimulating new ideas, new ways of being, new communication models, new ways of connecting and sharing information. This is what's being constellated by this shift of the nodal axis through this really important archetypal paradigm we have, right? The Gemini-Sag axis, fire and air. There's a real exciting, passionate time to this period. But it's, by the end of the year, though, it's going to retrograde. It's going to move back we're going to be into another year and a half where it's going to be in the Taurus-Scorpio axis, which is going to really be a much different focus for us for the next year and a half. It's going to earth, water. It's going to be much deeper. So we're really getting this opportunity to really get our philosophical and our mental models in place. And these triggers of all of these squares and these mystic rectangles, all of that's getting stimulated during what we had in Cancer season, and we're getting another chance here in Leo season. So just look out for, figure out how do all of these, seemingly, when we get these grand squares, there's some oppositional energy and there's some squaring energy, some conflicting energy, but it needs to be integrated. Squares force integration. So how are we going to do that? How do we get this emotional, with the moon in Pisces, with Jupiter in Pisces, this big, emotional, generous, progressive sense of being connected, all being one, right? That's the symbol. That's what this symbolism is constellating here, as opposed to this very individual, creative, expressive, desire nature with Leo and Virgo, and we get very focused on ourselves. So how do we connect ourselves to bigger pictures, to the other, and then coming into alignment with this nodal axis about this sense of past and future, about retrieving all of the great wisdom that we can inherit from our rich cultural past and figuring out how to move forward in this new, crazy, computer and internet mediated, mass media, electronic, digital world that we're building together. Gemini, right? There's some great wisdom, and there's some stuff to be left behind, honestly, too. Like some of this religious programming and conditioning, some of the fanaticism, some of the false hopes, and maybe outmoded cosmologies and things that are holding us back. Sagittarius, if we think about that dark side of Sag, the shadow side, where are we too sanctimonious? Where are we too attached to our own philosophies, our own worldview? And where can we be more open to other people's perspectives, new ideas, right? That Gemini aspect of the nodal axis. So pretty powerful day here as we sort of wind through the first week of Leo season. So just be alert to all of those energies. I want to move forward and get to what I think is the main signature of this this entire month. So if we come up forward here on July 29th, so a week in, and this is where we get another triggering of this mystical rectangle configuration. You can see it here where we have, as we've been talking about, Saturn in relationship to the nodes, but now we're getting, as Mercury is moving much closer to the Sun, it's only a few degrees away from this exact conjunction, this superior conjunction as we illustrated, it's forming this other section and helping us to complete the rectangle. Similar to the way Mars did that for us earlier last month. Now we're having a slightly different anchor, right? So this same thing we talked about last month getting configured, but in a different way. Before, where we had Mars in Leo, now we're getting the combined effect of Mercury joining the Sun in its own sign, right? And again, this is a really powerful sun. Sun in Leo is really a power signature. So it's really going to inject some serious energy into this mystic rectangle in a way that I think is going to be different tonally. You're going to feel it probably more acutely than we did even with Mars in a strange way. Mars was this energetic, and it was the beginning of something. It stirred something loose. Now it's really going to sort of possess us in a way. It's going to possess our minds. It's going to possess our sense of ourselves, right? That Mercury-Sun conjunction in Leo. Really stimulating energy. And of course, we have to consider it's being opposed Saturn in Aquarius, which is what we just talked about earlier. So this whole oppositional energy between the sense of self, the individual, creative, personal sovereignty, expressing ourselves and being free to be individuals, sovereignty, versus the good of the collective, Aquarius, right? The social sphere. And Saturn, rules, regulations, authority, structure, right? Not just any Saturn, a retrograde Saturn, where it's trying to recapitulate a lot of the structural changes that were implemented over the course of the last 6 months, right? So this opposition is really the heart of this mystic rectangle, which by itself is a challenge, right? It's forcing us to reconcile in some way. It's a relationship energy. All oppositions require relationship. They require a meeting, I'll meet you halfway. That's how you resolve oppositions, and it's usually through others and through relationship. So we're being called to really reconcile our sense of ourselves, our own individual, creative, fun-loving, spiritual joy, the love of life, right? Normally, when you just get this configuration by itself, it's super fun time. Like Mercury, Sun, Leo, yeah, let's express, let's create, let's share ideas. Let's do new things, let's think new things, let's learn new things in a creative, fun, joyful, playful way. Well, that's being restricted by this opposition from Saturn, Aquarius, retrograde. It's putting the kibosh on our creative will to be, right? And so I think we're all feeling that tension. I don't know about you, I know I'm feeling it. And I think a lot of people out there would feel the same. Now, what we're getting, though, is the power of this nodal axis that's creating the rectangle, which is giving us access to the gifts, right? What would normally be a much more difficult configuration is now suddenly getting the ability to really reconcile this conflict by accessing the gifts of the nodal axis. So how can we really, again, reinforcing this South Node Sag, what are the gifts of the past? What's the wisdom? There's, I think, a great opportunity. A lot of us have been looking back to, where can we find good signal through history about how to deal with these kinds of times. If you look, we've been looking back to the ancient Greeks. We've been looking to medieval times and the Renaissance. A lot of people are talking about a second Renaissance, and we look at these cultural and civilizational shift that we're amidst. And there's a lot of antecedents in history. Certainly the Hellenistic age, I think the beginning of the Renaissance, and now where we are now, there's a real wisdom to be pulled out of the past with this configuration and projected forward in a much more modern, progressive, future-oriented way. And so this configuration this month is going to allow us to access those resources, right? And we all have them personally, we have them through our family histories, we have them culturally. So there's that collective wisdom, there's the individual wisdom, there's being able to tap into your own knowing, right? And Sun, Leo, right? Trust your own creative, intuitional skills and instincts, right? We know it all. We just have to recall it, right? And so we're going to get a real opportunity for that kind of recall and to really put things in focus. And this configuration to me is set your compass, set your personal compass about where you're coming from and where you're going, what you're passionate about, and then really get the concrete idea. Because next year, as that nodal axis goes into the Scorpio Taurus aspect, it's going to really have to be grounded deep in the emotional body and the physical world. We're going to be meeting a much different set of challenges. So we want to get this part right. We want to go into that phase having really done the work of this Sag-Gemini axis so that we can put that into practice when we go into that Scorpio-Taurus axis as the nodes shift for their next cycle. So really exciting. Hopefully we all can manifest this in a very positive and proactive way, but just so be aware of all of these configurations playing out. So let's just keep moving forward, and that's going to stay in effect pretty tightly for the next, from the middle part of this entire Leo season. Trying to think of what else starts to pop out for us. Obviously, when we get now, the other thing that's a factor we should add into this configuration is the square, the other big configuration for 2021 we've been talking about all year, right? Saturn square Uranus, right? And I did an entire video on that Saturn-Uranus cycle earlier in May. And an interesting side note, it was funny, I was just looking at that. Where do I have that over here? Someone had posted a comment on that video that I had done. It was back in May. And I always try to reply to comments whenever I can. And when I went back to look at the video, I had noticed that YouTube had done us the service of putting a context warning on that video, right? Which is, I called it Saturn Uranus, the clash of the Titans for the New World Order. And I made a lot of references to, the George Herbert Walker Bush speech from, back in the late 80s, early 90s when he introduced that phrase. But YouTube found it necessary to let us all know that the New World Order is a conspiracy theory, which hypothesizes a secretly emerging totalitarian world government and would require that maybe we should check this wiki page out. So I thought that was interesting as we talk about Saturn in Aquarius, right? Very much what we're getting is control Saturn from Aquarius, these big tech platforms, right? They are the future. And so this is the kind of stuff that I'm sensitive to, and I'm sure a lot of you out there are. And this is what's being constellated by this configuration. So I thought that was interesting to take a look at. So thank you, YouTube. You may also want to put people to refer them to maybe the wiki page for the 41st President of the United States, who actually used that phrase in an address to Congress on September 11th, which is ironic. So not a conspiracy theory. It's actually a statement. It was actually a policy. It's very interesting what we're going through right now with this censorship and big tech, this whole thing. Where this Saturn, Aquarius, this Pluto cap, all of this energy in this last quadrant of the zodiac. We're really taking on very big structural social dynamics over the course of these years. And all of these things are going to start to shift over the next 2 to 3 years too, which is going to be a massive change. But we have to get shit right. If we don't get the monetary system, the banking system, the educational system, they're all on the verge of a systemic collapse. Hopefully we can repair them and move them into this Aquarius age so that we can get it right, because we're headed for some troubling times in the next couple of years if we don't sort of figure this Pluto cap out. And we're also needing to really find this relationship to Saturn and Aquarius. It's a tricky one, but I think, I think about control of, it's configuring, it seems to be constellating the shadow side of both. That shadow of Saturn, that shadow of Aquarius. There's this dark, controlling techno, what we hope for is this like technotopia becoming this techno-dystopian future. And a lot of these things are floating in the culture and in the zeitgeist right now. This is why we're being called to really figure this out, for better or worse. And I mentioned Saturn, Uranus comes in because that square with Saturn, which is another of the big themes of 2021, well, now it's getting this T-square. So not only is it squaring Saturn, as it's been doing all year, but now this Sun-Mercury conjunction is getting triggered by Uranus. So all of a sudden that impulsive, radical, sudden urge of Uranus is starting to get its way into this Leo, Sun, Mercury, right? So again, the song Street Fighting Man just keeps popping in my head and some of the lyrics to it, because it feels like that energy. Like I would expect such a stimulating time. I expect people to start to become more self-expressive in a creative, proactive way, ideally. But there's definitely this stirring, this configuration. When we start to bring Uranus into the picture, right, it's already trying to conflict with the restrictive social hierarchy of Saturn and Aquarius, right? That Uranus energy wants to erupt, disrupt, it wants to break through, right? Saturn is conditioning of society. It's the rules, the regulations. And what Uranus wants to do is decondition. It wants to blow those rules and regulations out the window so that some new, creative, stimulating freedom, right? Freedom from the known. It wants to explore the unknown, the progressive, the Aquarian modal, right? Uranus gives us that liberating quality of Aquarius, where Saturn is trying to control it, contain it, monetize it, structure it, right? This dynamic is really powerful. And so I would expect this connection here, this contact with Sun, Mercury, Leo, connecting with and squaring Uranus. It's just, that energy is just going to be stimulating. So, we had a lot of energy last summer, where we had, it was much like 1968, a lot of, with the protests and the riots, like, that was a year ago. You think about all the water under the bridge since then, but I feel like that stimulation needs to be revitalized and contained in a much more creative way. I'm really calling for the creatives of the world to start to show up this month and really let your voice be heard. Mercury, Sun. Give voice to these ideas. Your culture, your community needs you to step up, right? And I'm really like, where are we leaders ourselves? We all are leaders somewhere. We're either leaders in a family or in our peer group. We might have leadership roles at work, in our jobs, in our companies and corporations, in the world, in our social networks. Where can you bring your creative leadership to bear with a sense of fun and joy and humor, right? How can we really express that Leo energy in the best possible way? Because if we don't, like the shadow side of that too, it's like, where are we too prideful? Where are we arrogant? Where are we so full of ourselves that we're blinded to the impact we're having on society, where we're not hearing the innovation, the call for revolution in a positive, progressive way, where we could become this signal of a very tyrannical type of rulership, right? Saturn coming into Leo, right? If that axis isn't well integrated, that can be disastrous in a lot of ways. This sort of authoritarian type of energy that we've seen quite a bit in the culture around the world, really, for the last few years. So something to be really sensitive to this month. I'm really looking at this as being one of those major constellations that could have some really profound effects. And all of these things can go either way, right? It's all about this energy. How are we stepping into this? How are we using this pattern in the most positive, proactive way possible versus doing it unconsciously, unaware, right? And being almost victims of our circumstance. We don't want that. We want to take control. We want to be the architects of our destiny, as we like to say, right? So that's a big deal. I think that's one of the most significant things I want to look at, and I'm looking out for during this month. I'll go forward. We're going to have a pretty powerful new moon in Leo, that Leo new moon on August 8th. And as you can see, we've got Moon, Sun, and Mercury all within 5, 6. What do we got? 7 degrees. That's going to be it's going to be strong. We still have the opposition in effect. Now it's actually opposing Jupiter as it's moving back into Aquarius, right? So there's this review going on. The expansion that we've had is starting to kind of come back in on itself. We want to really sort of gather the resources. What have we figured out? What new expansion, what new horizons have we just explored? And we're being called to review those in a way. And so this will be a pretty powerful new moon, and a good time, always new moon. Set your intention at that time for that next lunar cycle to begin. So a lot of resources. We have a lot of Leo self-empowering energy this month, right? And can we use it? Can we harness this, the big ideas, right? That Jupiter and Aquarius. What are the best demonstrations of that configuration, right? There are some really wonderful, beautiful ideas floating out in our culture right now that we need to figure out ways of implementing, right? So I think we're reviewing that, and whatever came out that maybe got skipped over, for yourself that you noticed, or I'm hoping in the culture gets regathered, because we really need the big ideas right now. We really need some innovation that's going to solve some of these huge, complex, systemic problems, right? Pluto, Cap. So I'm hoping for the creativity, the creatives, the revolutionaries, right? Stimulate some really creative ideas that we can implement in the culture, because it's really needed more than ever. So I'm setting an intention for that. I'm trying to figure out ways I can be more creative, more expressive. I'm working in my communities where I'm trying to make a difference. I sense a shift occurring, that there's this time for action, right? We've figured out some of the new ideas. We're wrestling with this new environment, and there's a call to action. There's a call to initiate the hero's journey, right? Sun, Leo, be your own authority. I can't stress that enough as I look at this month. So yeah, Mercury is now moving faster. By the end of the month, it will have ingressed itself into the sign of Virgo, so we're going to get that shift. It's going to be a prelude for Virgo season as we come to the end of summer, when the sun will join there. But we're going to get a conjunction of Mars and Mercury, so that'll be a really intense. All of this Leo self-building that we've been doing as Mercury has been in contact with the sun, now as it moves past and becomes the rising star, that Promethean energy, we're going to be looking for ways to put it to real, practical, day-to-day functionality. We're going to have to really get down into the nitty-gritty, get into the details, inside the numbers, analyze, figure out the data, right? Find ways of making things improving, making things more practical. It's going to be an energy, and we'll talk about that as we move into Virgo season in the next month. So that's quite a bit already that we've probably unloaded on you, so I'm going to just wrap it up there. Lots to think about, but I think we can see some of the major configurations that are going to set the tone for us for the rest of this month. So hopefully that's been helpful, some insight. You can sort of map out your action plan over the next month. As always, if you find these videos helpful, I would appreciate you liking the videos and subscribing to the channel, and obviously hitting the notification bell so you'll know when new videos come out and come online. Hopefully I'll be able to get you some more. I've been super busy. As I said, this Mercury energy has gotten me drawn in a lot of very exciting new directions, and I'm hoping I'll be able to share with you guys in the coming weeks and months. But that being said, thanks for tuning in. Always a pleasure. I always appreciate and value your time and your attention. And yeah, have a great Leo season, everyone. Now.